Hey, welcome back to the About the Labor podcast here at VikingsTerritory.com. I am BJ Reidell, back here with my guy, Drew Mahowald, and today we got a very special guest here from Last Word on Sports, Mr. Eli Hartman-Seekin. I believe I got that correct there, Eli?
Yeah, you got it.
All right. So like I just said, Eli writes about the Vikings. He is the content team manager for Last Word on Sports. He's also been, very involved with the show. He actually won our free T-shirt giveaway, so we're happy to get that out to him and just get his opinion on some of the stuff that went down in Buffalo last week here. Obviously, we got a little bit of time between now and the Seattle Seahawks preseason game. Our game plan. This would generally be our analysis show, but for the most part, there isn't a whole lot to analyze from this football game. So we're going to try to break down some of the intricacies, some of the things that you can take away, especially from that second and third team. Those units, there's not a whole lot to gauge at this point from the initial starting lineup, given that they didn't play a whole lot of snaps. There's not a very large sample size. All the coaches said all this stuff during their press conferences anyway. So let's get this word from our sponsor out of the way, and then we'll get into some Vikings football stuff immediately. Black Stack Brewing is the brand new brewery smack dab in the middle of Minneapolis and St. Paul with a wide range of clean and flavorful brews and a massive bright tap room, perfect for intimate settings all the way to special events. Black Stack Brewing, 755 North Pryor, just north of Menards off of University Avenue in St. Paul, Minnesota. Shout out to our sponsors over the Twin Cities Directory, the best way to explore delicious bites and fun-filled nights that Minneapolis and St. Paul have to offer. Check it out at www.twincities.directory. That's www.twincities.directory, helping you discover the real Twin Cities. All right, folks, let's start off here with the quarterback competition. And I know I'm not talking about Sam Bradford and Teddy Bridgewater. I'm talking about the quarterback competition that we sort of announced as the true competition, at least as it pertains to 2017. That is Taylor Heinicke versus Case Keenum. Drew and I didn't talk a whole lot about this on the last episode here. After going through the film a little bit, my boy Taylor Heinicke, not that impressive. Certainly had the yips a little bit. It seemed like he, was doing the right things a little bit. He was breaking down his coverages well. He was going through reads well. But when he went to throw the ball 15 plus downfield, it was ending up 25 plus downfield. Eli, since you are our guest here today, why don't you kind of fill us in on your opinion of this quarterback showdown between Keenum and Heinicke, what your opinion is, how you're feeling, what you've seen from these quarterbacks thus far.
Well, I think definitely Keenum was the more impressive of the two. Sure. I was actually surprised with the mobility he showed.
Yeah.
I think that's a good sign considering how our line has been, just knowing that if Sam goes down, we have two guys who can move around in the pocket, get out of the pocket, get out of trouble. But Heinicke, man, I was pretty bummed at
it was not a great performance. I think you bring up a really good point with the mobility aspect. We saw that with Taylor Heinicke as well. I believe Heinicke had about a 15-plus yard run to escape pressure in one of his early series. But the thing that I think that, you bring up a really good point, Eli, that Keenum, I've never really thought of this guy as being mobile at all. I have always thought of him being a guy that has, concrete feet in the pocket. But he really did look pretty solid out there, especially rolling out to his right, to his strong side, obviously. Mm-hmm. He did throw back across the field one time, I believe, which, after Brett Favre in 2009, not a huge fan of that. But, Drew, what did you think of Case Keenum's performance? I actually, as someone that has been a little bit biased,
it was good. You could say it was a good performance, right?
I would say that it was a solid performance from, the guy that I don't want to win this quarterback battle. Let's put it that way.
Right. Well, I think I was impressed with his. I mean, it was like night and day between, when the Vikings took Bradford out and put Keenum in. The difference in, taking shots down the field a little bit. I mean, maybe that's part of the play calling. Maybe that's also part of, who's playing quarterback. But Keenum wanted to get the ball down the field, and that's obviously something the Vikings have struggled to do. So I liked that, and some of those shots worked. And I think it also helps, too, that, I think his receivers did pretty well. My guy Stacey Coley showed up. I think he made himself a very solid target for Keenum. So, he's a reliable backup. I've said this all offseason. He's kind of the guy that he's a safety net if you need a guy for a few games. I think Keenum could come in and win a couple of them. So, that's kind of how I feel. I'm not super excited about it, but he's a serviceable guy as a back. Sure.
Okay, so this quarterback competition, we have been making it out to be Taylor Heinicke versus Case Keenum, and that kind of argues that we just sort of uniformly believe that it's going to be two quarterbacks this year, Sam Bradford and then someone else, with Teddy Bridgewater obviously likely to start the season on the IR. I don't see any way around it at this point with him. They released Wes Lunt like 2 days into like OTAs, it feels like. He was gone almost immediately. And Mike Zimmer made it very clear that he only wanted 3 quarterbacks right now. So, Eli, over to you. I want to hear, do you think that this team is looking at keeping 3 quarterbacks with Teddy Bridgewater on the IR, or do you think that both Heinicke and Keenum are actually fighting for their NFL lives here during the preseason?
Well, I think that definitely if Bridgewater comes off IR, then they're only going to have one other quarter. Then they'll have 3. But before that, I think at this point, I think it's kind of likely that they'll keep 2. It seems like they're leaning toward 4 tight ends, and CJ Ham was being used a lot. So I just don't think they have enough spots to keep 3 guys. Maybe put Heinicke on practice squad, but I think he'd be gone in a heartbeat.
Yeah, I think that Heinicke has certainly done enough, or at least he did 2 years ago, right, to justify keeping him on the 53-man roster, just strictly out of fear that some other team is going to take him. We talked about this with Tayshawn Bauer on the last episode here. Just sometimes it's not about keeping the optimal 53, it's about keeping the optimal 53 for the 2019 season, right? What you believe to be the potential of some of these guys, and just the overall fear of a team like the San Francisco 49ers or the Cleveland Browns, who we love to throw shit at all the time. One of these teams that doesn't have a great roster to begin with would be looking for these high potential guys like Bauer, guys like Taylor Heinicke, for example. Drew, what do you?
I will say about this whole Heinicke, picking him up. If let's say he goes, or the Vikings do decide to enter the practice squad, or would like to anyway. I feel like a team would be more hesitant to bring on a quarterback, given learning a whole new system and a whole new offense, going through that transition. I feel like if you're struggling for quarterbacks, like the first thing you're going to do is look at who you've brought in already. Like for the Vikings last year, if they needed to, I feel like they would have kept Joel Stave.
Yeah.
If they hadn't made that trade for Bradford. So, I think it's different when you're talking about Tayshawn Bauer getting picked up as opposed to Heinicke, just because of the complexity of the quarterback position. How different some offenses are. So I'll add that.
That makes sense to me. I understand what you're saying about the overall complexity of learning a new offense, right? But if they're sitting on the practice squad for a year as they develop, is it really that big of a difference when they're trying? They're going to have a bunch of time.
You're adding the guy to the roster. If he gets plucked, he's being added to a team's roster.
Right.
So,
I guess that's true. So
yeah.
At the same time, there is the idea that you can keep them as the quote healthy scratch every single week as they kind of become more involved. Yeah, learn what's going on in their new city or whatever. I'll ask you that. I'll ask you guys this here, Eli. What do you think about the idea that Heinicke's shine has sort of been dulled a little bit here? This is something that I've sort of fought off for a couple of months here. But it's starting to look like, at the very least, he has the yips. He mentioned this in his post-game press conference that he needs to sort of chill a little bit and kind of, stop allowing, the weight, the gravity of the situation to affect him. Do you think that he is the same type of quarterback that we saw a couple of years ago, or do you think that maybe we are looking toward the end of the Old Dominion quarterback?
Well, I think, a cut on your foot isn't going to change you as a player.
Right.
I think what might have changed him as a player is, getting in his own head, thinking if he hadn't gotten hurt, he could be the starting quarterback right now. And, we wouldn't have had to trade for Bradford. He who knows what he would have done.
Right.
And I'm sure he knows what he has his own feelings about what he could have done.
Right.
And, he really did blow it. And now maybe he's in his own head about it. But physically, I don't think there's any question that he's probably I think he's athletic. He has a big arm. I don't think, put a different brain in him, I'm sure he'd be a great quarterback.
Yeah. It's interesting that you said it, because his brain, right, was kind of what got him onto the 53-man roster 2 years ago, right? He was able to break down coverages so well. He was a very cerebral quarterback, the word that I like to use all the time. He was doing everything so well from a mental standpoint 2 years ago, and It seems like, to Eli's point, his mental state, whatever it is that's holding him back, whether it is, the kind of being sort of nostalgic about his first year and starting to believe that that's the quarterback he needs to be, and just whatever it is that's
it could be a confidence thing.
It could be a confidence thing.
It could be confidence. I mean, if the Vikings brought in Case Keenum this offseason as a guy, I mean, presumably when you bring in a guy like Case Keenum who has starter experience and has been, at the very least a backup option for teams, he's coming in to be the backup, but if you sign that kind of guy, So I'm sure for Heinicke, that's kind of,
It's at least nerve-wracking, right?
Right.
It's putting him in a position. It's putting him in a position to fight for his NFL life, which, I'm all for that. We've talked about in the past how competition, breeds excellence. That's the most important thing always, is just to bring in a competitive 90-man group that you ultimately can get good position battles at every single spot. And it seems like Taylor Heinicke, he may not have believed this was going to be a competition. I may not have believed this was going to be a competition, but Case Keenum is making this into a competition. If this comes down to two quarterbacks right now, from what we've seen both at training camp and through the first preseason game, you pick Case Keenum. I'm sorry, I'm the ultimate Taylor Heinicke supporter, BJ. But from what I have seen, I mean, even one of the this is why you don't read the box score, right? One of the receptions that was made on a Taylor Heinicke throw was a ball that should not have been caught. It should have been intercepted. It got popped up into the air, and I don't know how. Was it Terrell Newby that came down with it?
Yeah.
Whoever it was a ridiculous catch. It was a terrible throw. It was a terrible read, but the result was good, and that's why you don't read the box score. That's why you watch the film, because straight up, that play could have been horrendous. It could have looked a whole lot worse in the on the stat sheet for Taylor Heinicke, but it ended up working out favorably for the Vikings. So this is, just overall, Heinicke has not looked good. He needs to, he's got plenty of time left. I'm not saying put him on the chopping block just yet. Obviously, there's 3 preseason games left, and that preseason week 4 tends to be when he shines, if I remember correctly. So I'm just here to say that, while I am still on the Taylor Heinicke train, I'm not seeing it this year so far, and he needs to really step it up, in my opinion.
Well, I think the thing also about Heinicke is that you have to remember that his one great game was a preseason Week 4 game against the Titans, which was a really bad team.
Yeah, at least their second and third string units. Yeah.
Right, and he was playing with Stephon Diggs against them.
Yeah.
So, I mean,
true. That's a good point. I forgot about that.
These are
like
definitely
dominating D2.
These are, to some degree you're right. It's you try to make this is what coaches are trying to do too, right? You try to make the evaluation that while they're not playing against a starting unit, you try to get an idea from their technical game, their fundamentals, and just their overall ability to see the field, whether that translates to playing against stronger competition. So far with Taylor Heinicke, not really doing it so much. So that's, to some degree, your point, Eli. This is a point that I've heard made quite a bit over my my Taylor Heinicke tyranny, let's put it that way. It makes sense to some degree at this point, because he's not showing the same capabilities that he did against Tennessee, and it's starting to make it look more like a one-hit wonder scenario with, obviously enough of a sample size where you saw a good amount of his snaps to see him go through a lot of progressions against different looks with different offensive fronts, all that type of stuff. But we're not seeing it again here. Drew, are we on the same page on all of this here? Or do you kind of still feeling that Case Keenum is going to be the guy ultimately here, or are you giving Taylor Heinicke a chance to redeem himself for the next couple of weeks?
I mean, Case Keenum was always the guy, at least for me. I always gave Heinicke a fighting chance, because if you put up that kind of a game, that kind of performance in a preseason game, that's definitely going to take notice. Right. But the thing, Keenum's, I think he's still right around 500 for his career record as a quarterback. He's not super impressive. He's not going to, doesn't have an Aaron Rodgers arm, or doesn't have kind of that elite playmaking ability. But I mean, nobody does.
He's a Matt Flynn arm.
Yeah.
There you go. Yeah.
Right. But Matt Flynn, 480 yards and 6 touchdowns. That one at the end of the year.
He turned one game into a lot of money. Yeah.
Something stupid like that.
Yeah.
Actually, that's he's made all kinds of money on that. But point is, Keenum, he's not flashy. He's not, the guy that anybody screams for to be the quarterback of your football team. But he's capable and he can win with enough support around him, which I think is enough to be a backup in this situation.
Yeah, it's starting to look more and more like Case Keenum might have been, at the very least, a great addition to, improve that quarterback depth, something that we were irate about last summer when Teddy Bridgewater went down and the Vikings had no real answer.
And people were saying all summer who they should be bringing in, and they didn't.
Right. So, it's good to see Case Keenum is, at the very least, is putting this team at playing competitive football. He's doing, at least he's doing considerably more than I expected him to do. So good on Case Keenum. Let's see. It'll be good to see, more from Taylor Heineke and really see if he really has kind of regressed to the mean of the undersized quarterback from the undervalued university that we kind of expected him to be. Or will he sort of flip the trajectory and, start, starting to show some of the things that I was so, invested in before this preseason game. So let's move on to a different position group here. We've talked a lot about the wide receivers, and I know that, to some degree it's been a huge focal point on the show, but I really think it's become such an important battle just because so many different guys are playing very, very well. We talked about Stacey Coley a little bit on the last episode, but after watching the film again here on Stacey Coley, how impressive was this guy last week? And on his opening audition to the Vikings faithful, at the very least, people in the fans that aren't going to read too much into one performance. I think a lot of people are in Stacey Coley's corner after this opening performance.
Yeah, I mean, Stacey Coley. I'm going to keep saying this every time we talk about it on the show because one day, as our buddy Jordan Reed likes to say, one day y'all will listen to me. One day y'all will listen to me when I compare Stacey Coley to Stephon Diggs. Obviously, Diggs has special kind of elite kind of quickness and acceleration out of routes, but Coley has the same movements. It's very similar. I guess. I'll put it in the video game context. It's a similar animation when you watch it, and he's got that. The route running is crisp. He schooled a couple of defensive backs against Buffalo. He's the real deal. He's got some size. He's not a big receiver, but he's also not a small receiver, as BJ learned in his interview with him. So Stacey Coley, he's a very good developmental project. And I think if the Vikings need a receiver at some point this year, it looks like Treadwell could be hurt for a while. He's definitely a very, very good replacement to have at your disposal to step in.
He's definitely special with the ball in his hands, right? We saw him catch that crosser over the middle, and he was able to, quickly use his field vision, make an assessment, and was very decisive as a runner. So some of that stuff that we've seen on his film from Miami as a punt returner or as a kick returner, that stuff translates directly to when the ball gets in his hands over the middle of the field. We saw that, firsthand in his very first preseason game. So that's very impressive for me that Stacey Coley is able to translate that field vision from college immediately to the NFL level. Even if it is against second and third string defenses, those guys, in theory, are still better than the college competition that he faced.
In theory,
right. I mean, obviously, sometimes it's not going to pan out that way, but that's what you would think. There's a reason why we say it's stupid to compare the Cleveland Browns whatever team versus Alabama. Ultimately, that's a dumb thing because it's the best of the best. You guys know the story. But Stacey Coley, man, Eli, let's get your take on him and just the other rookies, Rodney Adams as well. What'd you see from these guys in their first Vikings performance? If you want to extend this out to Michael Floyd and Caleb Jones as well.
Well, I think Rodney Adams impressed more than I thought he would. Sure. I think everything from camp was that he was really disappointing. But the way they used him I thought was really interesting. He's definitely a guy who's easy to root for. Coley, I think I definitely see the Stephon Diggs comparison. I think that
there you go.
he really has the potential to be something special. Floyd, I mean, he made a few good catches. I saw him in run blocking.
Right.
If you draw a
Noticed
penalty
that right away with
for
him.
blocking someone too hard, I mean, that's Zimmer said in his press conference he'd take that. So
yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's the type of player that Michael Floyd is going to be, more than just a wide receiver. I like that you brought up the point about his blocking, where, yeah, I believe there's a block in the back penalty they got called for, and he was actually on that Stacey Coley run on another play. There's another play where he probably could have gotten called for it as well. So he's probably got to be a little bit more careful. But I like that you bring up the point about Floyd's kind of run blocking and after the catch ability to block downfield for his guys, because I really do think that's an important piece of his game that we don't touch on enough, and especially with Laquan Treadwell being out, he's an important piece to blocking downfield in the receiving game for sure.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but I think the one guy who was really, really disappointing was definitely Isaac Fricke.
Oh yeah.
3 targets, 2 drops, 1 pass interference.
Yeah.
One was in the end zone, 1 was deep downfield, and 1 was for a first down on third down. You can't do that if you're trying to make an NFL roster.
Sure.
For a guy where they're bragging about how fast he does not seem to be able to get open.
No.
He's definitely struggling quite a bit. This translates directly from what we saw at training camp, right, Drew? I mean, Isaac Fricke's routes were meh at training camp. There's a lot of different times when he didn't stick his foot in the ground and really turn around. Instead, he was rounding off the top of his routes. We saw that to some degree where defenders were able to get so close to him at the stem of his route, and he wasn't able to create good separation. That, I think, contributes to some of these drops. The one drop was just ridiculous, the one that could have been a touchdown. You got to catch that football. I know it's a tough
with your hands. Catch it with your hands. Catch the football with your hands, Isaac.
Yeah, it's it's one of those things where we talked about how Isaac Fricke's kind of working on his last leg, right? He doesn't have practice squad eligibility anymore. This is his last real shot to make an NFL team. And as Eli points out, and Drew, I'm sure you can echo this as well, he's not going down swinging as far as I'm concerned. It's not looking good for him at all. The increased competition around him with Coley and Adams actually ran a pretty nice route on that little 2-yard touchdown. A simple route, but he did make himself available to Heineke. I think you got to, if you're ranking the receiver performance in his last preseason game, Isaac Fricke definitely at the bottom of the list, right, Drew?
Oh yeah, I think it sounds like and looks like he's a solid contributor on special teams, which might give him some sort of an advantage there. But when we were watching, this was just the basic wide receiver kind of warm up drills at camp when guys are going through the route tree. And you'd watch Diggs do it, and obviously it was just phenomenal, flawless. And then you see Fricke do it, and you're like, well, that sucked, what was that? And then you see Mobo do it, and you're like, I think that was better than the last guy,
Or it can get worse, or it gets a whole lot worse. One of the two.
Well,
I saw Mobo on the punt team a couple times at least.
He's And how about let's just get this out of the way real quick here. We'll get the vote. Is this the end of Moritz Boringer, starting with you, Eli?
Oh, it better be.
It better be. Drew, how about you?
Wow.
Mr. Mobo himself.
Hey, I was on the Mobo train. I called it, by the way, when he got drafted. I called that the Vikings to draft him. So I've kind of wanted this to happen, but it really doesn't look like it's going to. I've accepted that he was a publicity stunt. So, all right. Good luck to Mobo, but I think you really need it. So
that puts 3 for 3 here on the About the Labor podcast. I'll say this is the end of the road for Mr. Moritz Boringer from Germany, of course. So let's move on to a different position here. I want to talk a little bit about that weak side linebacker spot. Emmanuel Lemur, Edmund Robinson, Elijah Lee, Eric Wilson, who has been unbelievably impressive, just top to bottom, whether it was at training camp or in this most recent preseason game. Eli, what are your thoughts on how this position is going to ultimately shake out? Who do you see as the favorite at this point? Who is impressing you, and who has been a little bit disappointing from your vantage point?
Well, I think you got to put Edmund Robinson as the favorite. Just he got the first reps. He did what he was supposed to do. He was kind of iffy in run defense, but he made a really athletic play in coverage, knocking a ball down.
Yep.
And against the second and third teams, I thought he was better in run defense.
Yep.
Lemur was I mean, he looked good in coverage, better than I expected, but he didn't look special.
Right.
But man, Eric Wilson did a lot more than I was expecting. I think I kind of at the beginning of camp thought, he's going to be the same as the athletic linebacker we have every year. Last year we had the kid from Georgia, and the year before the
Brandon
guy who
Watts.
Yeah.
Brandon Watts beforehand, yeah.
But he looks like he knows what he's doing. So
it's important. That's a really big piece of what we need to see from
anything.
We need to see more. We need to see the weak side linebacker spot not only being an attacker as in run defense, but also look very good in coverage and just overall being able to flow sideline to sideline, which is why Eric Wilson has been so impressive to date here. His ability to really range sideline to sideline, we've talked a little bit about how he's kind of undersized, which may come back to bite him at some point here. But at this point, I'm with Eli. I think that Edmund Robinson is probably the guy. I thought that he also made a hell of a play on special teams, really upending one of the, I believe it was a punt I want to say it was probably a kick return. I think it was a kick return where he just absolutely upended their guy and made a good form tackle. That type of thing translates to defense, right? Good technique tackling in the open field. That's the type of thing that you want to see from your weak side cover guy that's in charge of covering a lot of ground and also being, the last line of defense if you do have your safeties come up in coverage a little bit in order to stop that run. Which was a bit of a problem for the Vikings in this most recent game. Drew, run defense against Buffalo, not impressive. LaShawn McCoy wasn't even out on the field. The fact that McCoy wasn't there and the Vikings were still not great at defending the run, is this something that's going to translate from last year, or is this a small sample size and something that we don't need to overreact to?
Yeah, it's a small sample size. It's something we don't need to overreact to.
Thank you.
Okay. But right.
But with Eric Wilson, I think the funny thing is, he's playing. I believe he was the immediate successor to Anthony Barr in that game as strong linebacker at the Sam position.
Yep.
He's on the Vikings depth chart I'm looking at right now. He's the second listed right there at that position.
Yeah.
So I think you have Lemur and Robinson kind of competing for that weak side job with Ben getting in there as well. I think he's getting some reps there too. But then it looks like right now, I think you got to give Wilson a roster spot simply because it looks like he's the guy right behind Anthony Barr.
He's looked better than Lee.
He's certainly looked better than Elijah Lee. Co-sign on that for sure.
Right, yeah. So, I mean, with first of all, Elijah Lee was the guy I think both of us kind of expected to really show up in camp, and we haven't heard a whole lot of anything, which sometimes is good, but in this case, I don't think
in this case, not good. We need to sit.
Right.
And when you're in his position as a 7th round pick, you got to hear something before you hear nothing, right? You got to hear something about his ability where he's able to translate his college game, or that he's been, very good at learning the playbook and knowing where he needs to be, or whatever it is, before you start hearing nothing. I mean, it's good probably that we hadn't heard much about Trey Waynes recently because we'd already seen, what he was able to do. I'm talking pre-injury, obviously, but we need to hear something with Elijah Lee before the silence, hits, and it's not been good for him. I think he's probably heading towards the practice squad, kind of definitively at this point, unless something drastically changes in his trajectory this season. I think that Elijah Lee is going to end up on that practice squad.
Right. Yeah. I mean, the thing about this linebacker position is that I think the Kentrell brothers situation is so intriguing to me because he hasn't been healthy for really any of camp, I believe. I think he was the first day there. He injured himself. So
do they want to keep him? Because, it's special teams. He's extremely valuable. And he's a very, as you like to say, cerebral player. But he just doesn't have the measurables to kind of back it up. So
absolutely.
Do they trust him to be in the mix and be a contributor if they need him? Or are they going to risk it on a different guy? Maybe it's Eric Wilson. Who knows? But I think the Kentrell brothers is kind of the wild card for the linebacker position.
The thing about Kentrell brothers being hurt now, right, is that if he stays hurt, then the Vikings can sort of keep him for an extra year on the IR all season long without having to afford a 53-man roster spot to him. Which, to some degree, that's helpful, depending on what the extent of this injury is. But at the same time, if you're Kentrell brothers, you want to be out on the field. If you're healthy, you don't want to just throw the Vikings a bone and be like, hey, you can roster me on your shelf till next year if you want, and then I'll try again. So if he's healthy, he's going to want to play, no doubt. But if he's not, the Vikings do have that option, and that'll be kind of nice to see. So let's transition over to the safety spot now. Obviously, we know what we have in Harrison Smith. That's definitive. Nobody should be saying anything about Harrison Smith after what he's been able to accomplish. I know the Vikings defense wasn't the strongest in run support yesterday, but let's talk a little bit about Jaron Kearse and some of these backup guys, Anthony Harris as well. It looked like both Harris and Kearse had played, fairly strong games. I'll start with Jaron Kearse, man. I thought that he was very impressive from that cerebral standpoint that we love to talk about.
Against the run,
especially, which is something that we've talked about probably too much with Jaron Kearse. But the fact that he did allow that 64-yard rush to Jordan Howard last year by kind of coming up in the wrong gap and just not being that safety net at the back end of the Vikings defense. So I thought it was very impressive to see him coming down hard in run defense and making good plays, good reads, finding the right gap, knowing where he needed to be. Eli, what do you think of the second year out of Clemson University?
Well, I really liked what I saw, run defense, but I think also there was a play in coverage where I was sure watching live that he was going to go for a big hit and get shed, and the guy was going to run for a touchdown, but he went for a form tackle. Yeah. And the guy got maybe a couple more yards than he maybe could have if Kearse had, again, going back to video games terms, gone for like an aggressive tackle.
Yeah.
But he wrapped him up and drove him out of bounds. And I was like, whoa, he knows what he's doing now.
Yeah, he's using his head a little bit more.
Right. And in run defense, I mean, when he's coming off the edge, he looks like a linebacker.
Right.
So,
that's the biggest thing with Jaron Kearse, right, is if he can be this smarter, more cerebral player that knows his assignment, knows where he needs to be, he can be a boomstick out there a la Cam Chancellor. I mean, he's got a 6'4", truck of a frame where, I mean, standing next to him, dude, he dwarfs me, and I'm by no means a small person. He's terrifying out there. It's all about just simply, can he think through his decisions quick enough to react instead of think about it? Drew, what do you think from Jaron Kearse against Buffalo? I thought he was very good. I thought it was certainly a building block towards him being a much better backup safety in 2017 than he was last year.
Yeah, I think the problem I had noticed with Kearse, and I think it showed too on that Howard run, was that he was getting too aggressive, trying to make the big play, and it sometimes backfired on him. And so it looked like he was a lot more calculated back in his first game as a sophomore, I guess now. That's very important at the safety position. Obviously, the term safety, do the safety valve on defense. So,
right.
And that was one thing. That was a couple years ago now, probably 2014, 2015 was Andrew Sendejo. That was kind of his, the main weakness he had was the too aggressive, and he would
tackling with his head down, injuring our players,
knocking out Xavier Rhodes.
Yeah, exactly. So it looks like Kearse is more calculated, and like you said, thinking about his actions before he performs them. So that's definitely a great step in the right direction. And he might not. He's got potential for sure. I think a lot of us were kind of surprised how far he dropped in the draft, and that he should have been, a mid-round pick. But
makes a little bit more sense.
We'll take it,
right?
We'll take it, and and now moving forward, I think it's just about putting that that kind of increased mental awareness to use in games and keeping it consistent.
Yeah, the thing that's fun about having a very intellectual defensive staff is that you can bring in guys like Jaron Kearse, like Edmund Robinson, like, pick Danielle Hunter, Tayshawn Bauer. I mean, all of these...
Anthony Barr,
all of these freaks of nature who, right, in college, not really thought of being... the smartest players, more guys that were able to win at the college level based on their athleticism or just simply the fact that they were on a very strong college defense. I mean, we saw Jaron Kearse, pretty much disappear against Alabama 2 years ago when obviously Clemson lost the national championship in that game. Stuff like that forces guys to fall into later rounds of the draft, and all of a sudden you see a guy like Mike Zimmer or Andre Patterson or whoever it is, the Vikings, George Edwards, any of these elite defensive minds are able to get a guy like J-Ron Kearse, Danielle Hunter, etc., on their roster and really, kind of talk them through their positioning and just getting them aligned correctly, getting their mindset right, and getting them really, stuck on the playbook. That's been a big difference for me in terms of what I've been able to see from guys like Kearse, guys like Tayshawn Bauer, who Drew loves. These guys have came in with, incredible physical frames and not too much up here pointing to my head. But it seems like they are playing a lot smarter, a lot quicker, and just overall we're getting a lot more from the 6th, 7th undrafted free agents than we kind of expected, at least during the Leslie Frazier regime, in my opinion. What are your thoughts on this, Eli?
Well, I think, we see these guys starting to stand out, these athletic freaks who, really could rely on that in college, right. These late-round guys coming in. But then some of the guys who come in maybe more pro-ready, but not as athletically talented, aren't really getting as much of a role. The Anthony Harris, is the Kentrell brothers, these kind of guys who come in and what you're getting. And then, but then they're going with the higher ceiling guys. The higher ceiling guys are performing.
Yeah. It's
the difference. I mean, it's a difference between, high-level college football or maybe even mid-level college football, and then playing at the highest level in the sport. You have to be athletic. Well, you have to be extremely athletic to make that work, and it shows when you get to that top level.
Yeah, it is interesting to see guys like Kentrell brothers being kind of the best example here of a guy that was very, very fundamentally sound, technically ready for the NFL, but obviously the injury this year is kind of hurting him in his path to ascension in the NFL, but at the same time, we've seen his lack of athleticism or his lack of, quote, NFL athleticism as, to be more, I guess, relative to the NFL, he's certainly not all there from an athletic standpoint. Let's put it that way. But relative to B.J. Reidell, he's the most athletic guy in the room. So, Kentrell Brothers is a guy that I'm always going to root for. But I think Eli brings up a great point here that sometimes it's better to go with these late-round guys that are just really top shelf in terms of their potential and their ceiling. Vikings are paying dividends here. Drew, after checking out Tayshawn Bauer a little bit and being able to, kind of assess his performance, are you still as impressed with what we talked about on the last episode here and, his ability to, kind of convince us now that he is worthy of a 53-man roster spot if he continues to play at the level he has? Yeah,
Tayshawn Bauer is worth a roster spot. The one thing we were worried about going into camp and kind of in his first preseason game was his ability in the run, stopping the run and setting the edge and being technically sound in that aspect. And he made a couple plays in the run, in run defense that I was really impressed with. He set the edge with those super long arms.
Yeah.
And then he throws the tackle and then gets his arm in there and makes an arm tackle on the running back. It's textbook form of what you do as a defensive end against the run. So if he can continue that and stay consistent with it, that's the next step here. But as far as a roster spot, I mean, I think you have to have room for him just because I think he's going to get plucked by somebody else if the Vikings do try and keep him on the practice squad. So I think just for that reason alone, I think you have to try to get him on the 53.
All right, so let's wrap up the show here with kind of our final takeaways from this first preseason game after getting a second look at it. For me, I'll lead us off here. You can do it. I'm going to work it as a sandwich, right? One positive thing, one negative thing, then one positive thing. So obviously you're sandwiching the negative thing. This is difficult in this particular game, especially from my vantage point, given that I've been pretty negative about this overall performance. From a positive standpoint, I'm gonna just use the really easy one right away. Stacey Coley, man, he's lighting it up. He's doing everything you can ask of him. He's fundamentally sound. He looks technical. He looks smart. I mean, he looks everything that.
He looks like Stephon Diggs.
He looks like Stephon Diggs, right? He looks everything and more of the 7th-round pick that people talked about him sliding strictly because of his passion for football. I mean, he stood up, pointed. He had the swag oozing from him. I mean, this guy cares about football. Stacey Coley is my number one positive from this game. Negative, how about just the whole football game? I'm sorry. It was not a good football game. It wasn't that they didn't come out ready or amped to play. They were just sloppy altogether. And yes, that's part of what the preseason is for. But at the same time, if this becomes a trend, I'm going to have a real problem with how sloppy the offense looked as a whole. And just the second string and third string offensive line, man, it's difficult to evaluate Case Keenum and Taylor Heineke when they're not blocking anything in front of them. So hopefully those two things improve. Those are my two biggest negatives. And then final positive here. I thought Rodney Adams was a lot more fundamentally and technically sound than we gave him credit for, at least in the last show. I thought that he looked a lot better than I thought that he was going to be, as from the point where I didn't think he looked good at training camp, and he looked a lot better, in my opinion, during this first preseason game. So credit to the late round day 3 rookies, wide receivers. I thought they were both phenomenal, and then obviously the offensive line and just the team as a whole needs to stop being so sloppy. Over to you, to Eli, on your final takeaways from this matchup.
I think the first positive is the punters. I think both looked. I think Samank looked how I expected him to look. Quigley looked better than I expected. They both did well with the directional kicking. Obviously, Samank had the one basically shank.
Yeah, that was gross.
But really, with either one of those guys, I'm feeling a lot more confident than I did with Jeff Locke. So that's definitely a good thing. I think on my negative, I'm going to go with the corner depth. I was really excited to see Terrell Sinkfield in this game, and he made a few good plays, but man, he looks the part of a corner turned or of a receiver turned corner.
Yeah, you can see it.
So, I think maybe a practice squad spot's the place for him, but yeah, I mean, and none of the other guys really that were in there. Sam Brown.
Yeah, Brown not. I just went through my grades on the training camp in the first preseason game. Sam Brown has been pretty much the entire time.
Whatever quarterback was in for Buffalo threw a high pass, and Brown comes off just shaking his finger at the offense, like, look what I did.
Yeah.
But,
he was not good.
And then for last positive, I think I'm going to go with the linebacker depth. Just that there are more guys who can play than I thought there were.
Fair. Yeah.
Eric Wilson showing up. Ben Gideon looked a step slow, but I mean, he looked passable.
Yeah.
And Lemur and Robinson, from what I saw, either one of them would be head and shoulders above what we got from Chad Greenwood the last couple of years.
Absolutely. Drew, over to you. You get to work with the remnants now that Eli. Yeah. After Eli and I have broken out pretty much everything from this game so far. So what do you got for us?
Well, I have I think two guys undrafted free agency to be mentioned in the last positives here. That's Tayshaun Bauer and Eric Wilson, both of them. I think Eli touched on the linebackers, but I want to just give the nod here to Wilson individually because I think his performance, for me, it really kind of it showed the potential that Jordan Reed talked about, I believe, on our show. I think this was before the draft.
Yeah,
even.
Dude, this was like 2 weeks before the draft.
Right. Yeah, I mean, he was talking about the range and the athleticism and, the side-to-side movements and everything. And I was like, okay, Eric Wilson, keep an eye on him. And now he's a Viking, and he's showing it in the game. So that's one for sure. That's a positive. I guess a negative would be overall just the offense, the offensive line. And obviously, the whole conversation here has been, to make sure that we keep this in perspective, that it's one preseason game. It's like 3 series or whatever it was for the first team offense. So,
right.
And in the first preseason game, offenses are never, ever going to look good. So we have to keep that in mind. But we will also add that the same problems that the Vikings were haunted by last year were also evident again. So, we need more of a sample size for sure to have any concrete, information on it. But my last positive, I guess, I'm going to say Dalvin Cook. Another rookie I'll highlight here because, he the numbers on the ground weren't super impressive. I think his yards per carry was under 3, but he made a lot out of what he was given, and I think that he as a receiver was very fluid, very swift, and kind of catching and turning and running. So I liked Dalvin Cook, and it looks like he can be a feature back pretty soon. And then I also add that Pat Elflein looked pretty good as well. So that last positive will be Cook and Elflein.
I'll throw in Jaleel Johnson as well as a guy that played pretty impressive. Yeah. So as a whole, this rookie class, this 2017 group, looks the part of being a little bit more impactful than this most recent class. Obviously, they don't have to do a whole lot to be, to do more than what Treadwell, Mackenzie Alexander, and co did last year. But it does look like the Vikings are going to get quite a bit from guys like Elflein, Dalvin Cook, Jaleel Johnson, Stacey Coley, and co. So overall, I think the biggest win for the Vikings was what they were able to get from their rookie class during this season, during this preseason game, and kind of what they might give us during this season here. So that about wraps up our show here. Big thanks to Eli for joining us, of course. You can check out his work at Last Word on Sports. He's the Vikings team manager there. Eli, why don't you give the guys a little bit of update on something that you might be working on, maybe what your team at Last Word on Sports is doing in terms of Vikings content.
Well, right now the biggest thing I'm working on is getting my computer fixed because it's been in and out of commission for the whole summer. So, other than that, we're really trying to grow the Vikings team. We have 2 new writers who, you can check out their work. The Last Word on Vikings page. We always do daily updates, polls, that sort of stuff. We really are just trying to get our analysis out there, build the Last Word on Sports brand as a whole. So, check it out if you haven't.
There you go. I would recommend it. Eli does tremendous work over there. There's a reason why we had him on our show today, because we trusted him to come on here and give us some hashtag Vikings content for everyone. Make sure to check out his work at Last Word on Sports one more time. And as always, our sponsor that is Black Stack Brewing and the Twin Cities Directory. Make sure to check out both of those places. Black Stack Brewing, new tap room right off of University Avenue. As Drew's displaying, if you're checking out on video right now, Black Stack Brewing. It's fantastic, guys. I really am a big fan of this place, and I know that Drew and I will be doing a live show for the 3rd preseason game against the San Francisco 49ers from Black Stack Brewing. Make sure to check us out at that point. And that's about it. iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play. You guys know where to find us. Myself. Eli, why don't you give the guys your Twitter handle real quick here?
So it's at SkullCease. And I'm just going to triple check my Last Word on Sports, because if I screw it up, that would be bad. And the other one is at LWOS_Vikings.
There you go. All right, folks, make sure to check them out on Twitter. Drew at Drew Mahowald, MAHOWALD. Myself, Robert Reidell, ROBERTREIDELL. And we'll catch you later on this week for a preview of the Seattle Seahawks preseason game and more Vikings content as always. Thanks for joining us, folks.